Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the First Principles podcast. My name is JC, and I am so excited to be here with you guys. On this one, I want to talk about a really cool book that I am currently reading that is awesome. It's called The Prince by Machiavelli. And Machiavelli, I would say, is somebody that is really misunderstood today. A lot of people associate him with um, not being 100% honest with manipulation, those kind of words. And the thing is that when you start to read his core ideas, you realize that at the base, there's a lot of really great principles that are actually timeless principles that we see over time people that are really successful use. So I would say that when you grab the book and you start to actually see what those principles are, you start to realize that there's a lot of more depthness and it's more deep than simply how to, trick people, which is not exactly what Machiavelli's trying to say or do. And one thing that I love about him is that Machiavelli is a man that is able to see people for what they are and is able to really explain why people operate in the way that they operate. And what's really interesting is that this is a book that was written in the 1500s. So when you read it, there's a lot of really big words and really big names and a lot of history that you might not be really familiar with. But when you start to go deeper and deeper and deeper, you start to get these principles, and they are just amazing. And the way that this man thinks is really, really interesting. So what I want to do today is go through a couple of these principles, break them down, and see what we can learn from them, okay? So in the first chapter, basically what Machiavelli is trying to say is that there are different types of states. So he explains that there's republics and there's kingdoms. And the problem is that you cannot apply the same strategies in one domain to the other. So when we really read this, the thing that he's trying to say is that the strategy per se that he's trying to explain is that you have to know exactly what game you're playing so you can develop a strategy that actually works for that game, because you cannot use the same strategy for one thing and the other, because different systems require different approaches. And when I read this, I think it sounds common sense, but at the same time, how many people don't actually have a strategic plan for their life? And one thing that I would argue as well that is really caught my eyes is this thought about you have to know where to apply different strategies. And one thing that we do a lot is we there's so many voices out there that are explaining how to be successful, how to make money, and we think that these strategies can fit into our lives without us really um, taking the time to analyze, okay, does this actually work? And for me, for example, one that I see a lot in the business realm in the business realm is this idea that millionaires and billionaires have at least seven sources of income, right? So now what people start doing is freaking out and saying, okay, well, I'm going to start this business and have my job, and I'm going to try to see if I can buy vending machines and this and that, and it's such a stupid thing to such a wrong way to think about it, because the strategy that these people are using are far greater and far more advanced than the strategy that somebody that is just starting out has to use. Why? Because when you analyze huge businesses, people that have been really successful, what you'll realize is that they chose a single domain, a single business. They built that up, and then once you get to a point where you can have more resources to work with, that is when you expand to other things. It is not Sam Walton building seven different businesses. It's Sam Walton building Walmart. It's not Steve Jobs building seven businesses. It's Steve Jobs building Apple, right? So that is one thing that I found really fascinating that he explains, and we can apply today. So the idea is with this principle, what are the things that you need to be focusing on that's actually going to get you to where you want to go, and try to like get away from all the other no's that you might be having in your life. The next principle is never leave an enemy injured enough to hate you, but strong enough to retaliate. And really, what Machiavelli is trying to talk about here is not leaving unfinished conflict or unfinished business. And when you hear this, it might sound so intense, right? You're like, wow, like that sounds like um, too straightforward. But really, the point that he's trying to make is don't leave half measures because half measures create long term problems. And I'm sure that we can all relate to this where we have maybe had an issue that we have to fix and we fix a little bit of it or we fix one part without actually addressing the big problem. And then this problem just becomes greater and greater and greater and greater until it's a huge issue that we need to solve. And I think this scenario you can apply to business, but you can also apply it to your life. If you have a problem with somebody, right? If you've been dealing with an issue with a coworker or a family member or a client, right? And you try to fix it a little bit here, try to fix it a little bit there, try to fix it here, try to fix it there. You realize really, really fast that these small tweaks that you're doing are not doing anything. So now instead of having the actual conversation that you need to have right now, you push it later on and then it becomes a bigger conversation. So the idea is do things all the way when you have to do them so you don't have to deal with them later. And this has even a deeper lesson, which is unfinished decisions consume enormous mental energy. So great leaders make sure to complete decisions. One thing that you might have noticed, and this happens to me a lot, and it's something I'm trying to get better at, but when you do not complete a thing, or if you have something on your checklist and you leave it off to the next day and then the next day and the next day, that thing is just consuming mental energy, right? Because you're thinking about, oh, I have to do it, I have to do it, I have to do it, I have to do it. And all the times you've been thinking about it, you could have already done it. So one thing that Machiavelli is trying to say here as well is that unfinished decisions consume mental energy because you're always thinking. So in the sense where he's talking about, you have to completely finish off the enemy. If you don't, you're always going to be thinking about that. You're always going to be thinking, can they get stronger? Can they seek revenge? Can they take my business? Can they do this? Can they do that? So you have to completely make those decisions so you can finally get that out of your head and out of your mind. So the key principle there is don't confuse activity with resolution, right? Just because you're working at something doesn't mean that you're actually resolving it. So great strategists finish the problems early. One of the biggest concepts that Machiavelli shares is this idea of you can either achieve success through virtue, through ability, or through luck. And what you have to do in your life is try to basically leverage yourself to gain as much ability so the things that you're acquiring in your life are based on your own power and not the power of others or the power of luck. Principle number 3, great leaders don't wait for perfect circumstances. They use imperfect circumstances as opportunities. This is one of the most fascinating principles that he explains. And really what Machiavelli is trying to say is that you have to build your own power in your life and you can't be dependent on luck or other people in order to build the things you want to build. And the example that he gives is really interesting is Moses. So he showcases how his people were oppressed, and Moses, right, through the power of God and through a lot of grit and fortitude and power and hard work, he's able to free them, right? But he had to put himself out there. And what he's trying to explain is that there's never going to be perfect circumstances, but we have to use those moments in order to actually build value. And in business, when you look at a lot of huge companies, a great example is Google actually. Google started during a really hard recession, and you'll see that a lot of these big companies that bring so much value actually start in the imperfect times. So what he's trying to push us to understand is that we can't wait for perfect times because perfect times are never going to come. So you have to start right now and build whatever it is that you want to build right now because the moment to do it is when you have that idea. And talking a little bit more about business with this idea, opportunity usually disguises itself as disorder. So a lot of business ideas at the end of the day come from problems that people see, right? If you think about Airbnb during the financial crisis, or Uber when taxis were frustrating customers, or Amazon when e-commerce barely existed, right? These companies have found actual disorders and problems, and that's what they fix. So it's a great thing to know because that means that you don't have to wait for good times to build stuff. You can build it right now. Principle number 4, to imitate great men, not because you'll become them, but because aiming high produces high outcomes. This is one of my favorite ones because it is exactly what we're doing right now. at the end of the day, one of the things that we have to be doing is going back through history and understanding what are the patterns that people that have built the things that we want to build have used, so we can then apply in our own lives. And the thing that is really interesting is when you read about all of these different founders and entrepreneurs and businessmen, they all read biographies. That's why the Founders podcast is one of my favorite ones, because there is so much value in going back and learning what people have learned. And the most amazing thing is that you can buy a book, a book like this, that cost $5, and you can get so much, you can get $1 million lessons from them. So that is one thing that we have to be really capable of and really open to, of like, hey, you know what? If I want to do a certain thing, if I want to become a basketball player, a business owner, whatever it is, let me read about men that have done it before so I can learn from them, see where the pitfalls are, and create a base for my life, create the scaffolding that I'm going to use in order to become that man, right? Now, at the end of the day, the rule says not because you'll become them, because you can't, right? There's only one Michael Jordan, there's only one Kobe Bryant, there's only one Steve Jobs. But by having a great plan and a great base, you're going to get so much further than by trying to figure it out on your own. And also, once you have these patterns in place, you'll be able to manipulate them and combine them with other ones so you can create exactly what you're trying to create. And principle number 5, the last one for today. If somebody else's success is the reason you're successful, your first job is to stop depending on them. This sounds harsh, but there's a lot of truth to this. If you're somebody that was inherited a business, inherited money, right? At the end of the day, it is your responsibility to create and build the skills that you need in order to maintain that. Why? Because that person might not be there tomorrow. And again, this sounds harsh, but there's so much truth to this, right? Because we see it happen all the time. Somebody, a family member passes away, and then the company goes to the son, and the son runs the company to the ground. That's pretty terrible, right? So what Machiavelli is saying is that is the first thing that we have to focus on. If we gain power through somebody else, we have to make sure that we don't depend on them, because we don't know what tomorrow might bring. And what that means is developing the skills, developing the fortitude, developing the strength you need in order to be able to separate yourself financially, per se, from that person. So again, it sounds harsh, but when you really see the repercussions of it, which is you might lose your livelihood because you depend on somebody else, it's pretty bad. So that right there concludes this episode. Those are 5 ideas that came from the book Principles by Machiavelli. Again, it is a great read. It is one of those that will help you and also keep you hooked for hours. So if you like this type of content, give me a follow. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is build a podcast where we talk about ideas from history, from politics, from other men, women, so we can actually become better and become the people that we're meant to be. I'll see you on the next one.